Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, throwing their pale glare across the room. The walls were lined with maps and satellite images, red circles and black arrows crossing like scars. Men in fatigues leaned over the table, their voices low and firm, their pens scratching quick notes across creased paper. Radios hissed in the corner, the static cutting in and out with distant chatter. Orders moved like currents, sharp and deliberate. And through it all she sat, silent, unseen. Her chair was pulled slightly back from the edge of the table as though she had placed herself on the margins, though she hadn't meant to. She had arrived on time, earlier than most. She had set her notepad down. She had looked up, waiting for acknowledgement, but none had come. Not a glance, not a nod, not even the casual, unspoken gestures soldiers used to let one another know they belonged. She could feel the weight of absence pressing down. Her name had not been called with the roll, her assignment not mentioned in the tactical rundown. It was as if she were a shadow seated among men who had already decided she did not count. Her jaw tightened. She wanted to lean forward, to clear her throat, to speak even one word that reminded them she had earned her place at this table. She could tell them about the weeks of training, the hours of pain she had pushed through when others had quit. She could tell them about the quiet tests, the ones she hadn't bragged about, the ones that had demanded more than strength. Endurance, patience, steady hands when the world was shaking. She had them all. She had proved it. But she didn't speak, not yet. Because there was something she carried, something none of them knew. And she wasn't sure she was ready to let it out, not here, not in this room where eyes measured, judged, dismissed. She pressed her lips together, forcing herself into silence. She would wait. The commander's voice cut through the murmur, direct, confident. He outlined the operation, moving through phases and objectives: secure the perimeter, identify the cells, protect civilians if possible, neutralize threats if necessary. His words were sharp, but the men listened with the ease of familiarity. They trusted him. They trusted each other. And in that circle of trust, she was an outlier. Her gaze drifted across the table. One soldier leaned back with his arms folded, his face hard but his eyes carrying shadows of exhaustion. Another tapped his pen rapidly against the notepad, restless, impatient. A third rubbed the edge of a small coin between his fingers, his thumb tracing a groove as though it anchored him to the present. These were men with their own burdens, their own rituals for holding themselves steady. She understood that. She had hers too. Her ritual sat in her pocket, a small chain with a single dog tag, battered, edges dulled. It wasn't hers. It had never been hers. It belonged to someone else. She hadn't taken it off since that night. Her hand brushed it briefly, as if to remind herself it was still there, hidden in her pocket, pressing against her palm. A quiet weight she carried into every room, every mission. The commander finished his orders, his voice dropping into the calm tone that came only when decisions were final. Chairs scraped against the concrete floor. Men stood, their boots thudding against the ground in a rhythm of purpose. No one looked her way. Not even when she rose too. She gathered her notepad, slid it under her arm, and stepped aside as the others filed out. Their conversations flowed around her like she was air. She caught fragments, talk of supplies, of last-minute checks, of jokes meant to lighten the heaviness of what they all knew might come next. Their laughter had edges to it, forced, brittle. She listened without comment, though something inside her stirred. She wanted to remind them that laughter before danger wasn't weakness. It was survival, she knew that. But again she stayed silent. The hangar door screeched as it opened to the outside. Wind swept in, hot and dry, carrying with it the taste of dust. The desert stretched beyond, endless, harsh, unforgiving. The sun was already rising, heat radiating across steel and sand alike. Her boots crunched as she stepped out, her eyes narrowing against the light. She could hear the engines of armored vehicles already rumbling, their low growls shaking the air. Soldiers climbed aboard, their movements brisk, efficient. She followed, pulling herself up with practiced ease. Inside, the space was tight, the air thick with sweat and oil. Men adjusted straps, checked weapons, muttered to one another. No one spoke to her. She sat with her back straight, hands resting lightly on her rifle. Her heartbeat was steady now. She had learned how to control it, how to find calm in the moments before chaos. Her father had once told her, "A steady hand isn't born, it's built in silence." She hadn't understood it as a girl. She did now. The vehicle jolted forward, throwing her slightly against the bench. Dust billowed in through cracks, coating the air in a thin, gritty haze. She breathed it in, let it settle against her skin. It anchored her, made her part of the place she was about to enter. Across from her, one soldier shifted, his eyes flicking briefly to hers. He looked at her like a question, not a teammate, like he was wondering why she was here. She held his gaze for a moment, steady, unflinching. Then he looked away. She thought of her brother, of the night he hadn't come back. It had been quiet at first, just a late return. Then whispers spread through the barracks. A mission gone wrong, details sparse, official words given in clipped tones. She had waited for more. She had wanted truth, not paperwork. But the truth had come in silence. In the absence of footsteps outside her door. In the absence of laughter she had once taken for granted. She had promised herself then she would never stand by and wait again. If she could move, she would move. If she could act, she would act. But promises made in grief were hard to hold in reality. And now, sitting in this armored box, surrounded by men who doubted her, she felt the fracture of that promise. Could she carry it? Could she make it real here in this place where no one wanted her voice? The vehicle slowed. A signal passed down the line, hands raised, voices low. The mission had begun. The door opened. Sunlight poured in, blinding, fierce. Heat surged against her face. She stepped out with the others, her boots sinking into loose sand. The air vibrated with tension. Every building, every alley, every window was a potential story unfinished. The squad moved forward, rifles up, eyes sharp. She fell in line, her breath slow, her focus narrowing. She could feel the doubt pressing at her back, not her own, but theirs. Every glance, every hesitation. And yet, there was something else too. A flicker, a whisper deep inside that told her she would not remain invisible forever. Because she carried something. Something they didn't know. Not yet. The wind outside rattled against the metal hangar doors, though they were miles from base now, pushed forward into the outer district of the town. The street stretched in front of them, pale dust rising with each bootfall, the smell of rust and stone clinging to the air. It was the kind of silence that never stayed still. It shifted, carried unseen eyes in its weight. She tightened the strap on her vest, the nylon biting against her shoulder. Her fingers shook, not out of fear but memory. The night her brother didn't come back had never left her. The knock at the door, the folded flag, the words clipped and formal that never told the whole truth. She remembered holding his dog tag in her hand, her reflection bent in its scratched surface. She had promised him silently, fiercely, that she would finish what he couldn't. But promises didn't dissolve doubt. And doubt was all she felt pressing in from the men around her. They moved in formation, rifles angled, eyes flicking from door to rooftop. She kept her pace even, her breathing measured. Behind her, boots scuffed, one of the soldiers muttering low, something she couldn't catch but knew was about her. She didn't flinch, didn't look back, but inside a part of her burned. A sergeant brushed past her at the corner, motioning for two men to check the alley. He didn't meet her eyes, didn't include her. She wasn't given a gesture, a signal, not even a word. She was a ghost in their ranks. She swallowed it, held it deep. Her jaw locked, her lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to scream, to remind them she had trained harder, longer, that she had earned this place. But what good were words to men who had already closed their ears? So she said nothing. The clock ticked in her head, each second stretching, drawing out like the slow pull of a trigger. The mission was already in motion, though they hadn't seen it yet. She could feel it in her chest, the prickle of tension, the hum beneath the silence. She had learned to listen to that hum. It saved lives. Dust swirled down the street, caught in a sudden breeze. A piece of cloth flapped from a broken window above, snapping once before falling still. She stopped for half a heartbeat, her eyes narrowing on the movement. Nothing followed. No figures, no shadows, just emptiness. She forced herself forward, but the unease stayed. Ahead, the squad leader raised a hand, halting them. They crouched low, rifles angled, scanning. The street bent left, tighter, darker. A funnel, too perfect. She watched their eyes flick back and forth, measuring, debating. They hesitated. Her instincts screamed, but her voice remained caged in her throat. She waited. The signal came, move forward. Her boots touched the edge of the bend when it happened. A sound, soft but wrong, too quick, too sharp from the window above. Her breath froze. Her finger curled. She raised her hand, high, sharp, urgent, but no one looked. Their eyes were elsewhere, their focus locked on the alley ahead. So she did the only thing she could. Her rifle snapped upward, scope aligned, a blur of movement behind broken glass. She didn't think, she didn't need to. The shot cracked. The silence shattered. Glass rained down, sparkling in the harsh light. A figure collapsed inside, slumping into shadow, a weapon slipping from his hands. The squad froze, every head snapping toward her. Confusion etched across faces, shock, disbelief. Then slowly, the realization. If she hadn't seen it, if she hadn't acted, the first fire wouldn't have been theirs, it would have been against them. No one spoke. The air throbbed with silence. They moved again, quicker now, rifles scanning higher, sharper. She caught one glance, just one, from the soldier who had looked at her in the transport. Not trust, not yet, but not dismissal either. Something between, something unsettled. Her breath slowed, her hands steadied. She had broken the silence, but words still didn't come. She didn't ask for thanks, she didn't expect it. She just kept moving, eyes sharper, ears tuned to every echo. Because she knew, that shot wasn't the last test, it was only the beginning. Night pressed heavy by the time they pulled back to the temporary outpost. The walls were thin, the roof patched with metal sheets that clattered under every gust of wind. A single dim bulb swung above, casting shadows that stretched too far. She sat against the wall, rifle across her lap, cloth running slow circles over the steel. Her movements were steady, almost ritual. The smell of oil and dust clung to her fingers. The others gathered at the center of the room, laughter breaking through the weariness. Cigarettes burned low, the smoke curling to the ceiling. Stories passed like canteens, old missions, jokes told too many times. Each laugh carried cracks, but they held on to them anyway. She stayed apart, listening, always listening. One soldier's voice lowered, different. His words quieter, slower. He spoke of a letter folded in his pocket, a letter he hadn't mailed yet, for his daughter. His fingers pressed against it like it was fragile glass. He was afraid, he said, that if he waited too long, she'd forget what his voice sounded like. The room went still, no laughter, just silence thick and raw. Then someone forced a laugh, too loud. Another followed. The moment cracked, splintered, until their voices rose again, desperate to cover what had slipped through. She watched them, her cloth paused on the rifle barrel, her chest tightened. She knew that silence, the silence of fear, the silence of love carried too far from home. She wanted to speak then, to share the story she carried, the empty chair at her family's table, the silence that never left her house after her brother was gone. But she didn't. Not yet. They weren't ready to hear it, and she wasn't ready to tell it. Instead, she lowered her gaze, her hands steady once more. She focused on the rifle, on the rhythm of cleaning, of preparing, because tomorrow would demand it, and she would be ready. Her brother's dog tag pressed against her side, cold, heavy, a reminder. Promises were easy to speak, hard to live, but she had chosen to carry this one. And she would carry it until they saw her not as silence, but as strength. It started in the desert, where shadows moved faster than the eye. The streets narrowed into veins of dust and stone. Broken walls rose on either side, scarred with bullet holes and blackened with fire. The air smelled of copper and ash. Her boots sank into the grit, every step muffled by the silence pressing down. She kept her rifle angled, eyes cutting from rooftop to alley to shattered window. The squad moved ahead, formation tight, their breaths sharp, steady. She followed in their line, the outsider among brothers. Her skin prickled. Sweat slid down her back, not from heat alone, but from the weight of invisible eyes. She had walked enough of these streets before, different towns, different wars, but always the same silence before the storm. The silence that wasn't silence at all. Her gaze tracked upward. A rooftop shadow shifted. A curtain flicked too quickly. Somewhere deep in the maze, a dog barked once and fell silent. Her hand twitched on her rifle. And then she saw it, the glance. One of them looked back at her, a soldier with a square jaw, his helmet tilted low. His eyes carried hesitation, doubt. She was the liability, the variable they hadn't asked for. She felt the sting of it like a blade. Her throat tightened. For a moment she almost faltered. Almost. But then, in the corner of her vision, something moved. A window shattered high up. A flash of fabric, too quick, too wrong. Her breath stilled. She raised her hand again, high, sharp, urgent. No one saw, their eyes locked on the alley ahead. She raised her rifle instead. Scope up, sight steady, finger poised. The shot cracked. The sound tore the silence apart. A figure crumpled in the shadows above, the weapon slipping from his hands. A distant clang echoed down the street. The squad froze, whipped their heads toward her. Confusion, shock, silence. She felt their eyes drilling into her. The soldier with the doubt looked again, not with judgment this time, but with something else, something unsettled. Her chest rose slowly. Her finger eased from the trigger. She said nothing. No thanks came, no nods. They moved on, sharper now, their eyes tracing rooftops where before they had only looked ahead. And though none of them spoke, she could feel it. Something had shifted. Not trust, not yet, but awareness. The mission crawled forward. Narrow streets turned to tighter alleys, stone walls pressing close. The smell of oil and burning plastic hung in the air, the remnants of fires that had burned too long. Every door was closed, every window dark. Too quiet. Her heart beat slower, deeper. She had trained herself to listen, not just with ears but with skin, with instinct. And now instinct screamed. She stopped. Her boot hovered just above the ground, her breath sharp in her chest. A tripwire, thin, faint, almost invisible in the dust. Her eyes snapped down. The line stretched across the ground, barely catching the light. One more step and the soldier ahead of her would have triggered it. Her hand shot out, grabbing his vest and yanking him back. He turned, anger flaring in his eyes until he saw. The wire glinted. His face shifted, pale, silent. She crouched, pointing steady. Her voice came calm, low, "Don't move." The squad leader dropped down beside her, eyes narrowing at the trap. His jaw tightened. For the first time since she joined them, his gaze met hers, not with dismissal but with acknowledgement. He gave the signal. The wire was marked, bypassed. No words passed, but the silence now carried something new. Hours stretched. The sun began its slow fall, bleeding orange across the sky. The air thickened with dust. Shadows lengthened, pressing into corners, swallowing alleys whole. And then the ambush. It began with the hiss of a bullet, then another. The street exploded in fire. Dust ripped into the air, bullets slamming against stone, splintering walls. Shouts rang out, sharp, frantic. The squad dropped low, pressed against crumbling walls, pinned. She hit the ground hard, her cheek against grit, her rifle tight to her chest. Her breath came fast, but her hands did not shake. Not this time. She scanned. Angles, echoes, flares of muzzle flash in the distance. She saw them high, hidden. Her lungs steadied. She crawled, elbows biting into the dirt, glass cutting into her arms. She ignored it, inched forward, found the broken wall, the one opening that gave her the angle. Scope up. Breath in, hold. One shot, a figure dropped. Another, each movement precise, deliberate. The chaos shifted, the fire weakened. And then the squad surged, breaking the trap, pushing forward, voices rising with force, with survival. She stayed back, covering, her rifle steady, until the last of them passed through. Only then did she rise, dust streaking her face, the echo of her shots still ringing in her ears. When it was over, silence fell again, thick, heavy. They looked at her, not speaking, just looking. And she saw it, the change. Not complete, not full, but real. They had doubted her courage. But now, in the dust and silence, they had seen it with their own eyes. Night came hard. They regrouped in a half-collapsed building, the ceiling caved in, stars faintly visible through gaps in the broken roof. The ground was hard, uneven. They sat in circles, their faces dimly lit by the glow of a single lamp. She sat apart again, but not as far. Her rifle beside her, her knees drawn up, arms wrapped loosely around them. She listened, always listening. One soldier spoke of his mother's cooking, the kind of meal he hadn't tasted in years. His voice softened, cracked once, then steadied. Another admitted he hated the silence of home because it reminded him of nights like these. The youngest muttered about a girl he hadn't called back before deploying, a regret he laughed off but couldn't hide. They were human in those moments, stripped of ranks, stripped of armor, just men carrying weight they couldn't put down. And she thought of her brother again, of the nights he used to tell her stories, not of war but of dreams, of leaving, of building, of life beyond uniforms and weapons. Her chest ached. She touched the dog tag in her pocket, her fingers curling around it. And in that circle of half-light and broken words, she made another promise. Not just to survive, but to make sure they did too. Even if they never saw her as one of them. Because courage wasn't for recognition. It was for moments like this, when silence pressed too heavy and someone had to carry it unseen. She froze just for a breath, her body pressed against the cold wall of a half-collapsed farmhouse. The storm had rolled in without warning, turning dust into mud, and now rain hissed down like a curtain between life and death. Across the open field, flashes of gunfire cut through the gray haze. Her radio crackled with fragmented voices, men calling for positions, for medics, for air support that wasn't coming. And through it all, her mind was a war zone of its own, not just the fight outside, but the storm inside her chest. Could she keep leading them forward, when every step felt like it might break her? Her heart hammered, but she forced herself to steady her breathing. The others looked to her. Young faces streaked with grime, fear written in their eyes, hands trembling on their rifles. She recognized it, the same fear she once carried, hidden deep in her bones, when she was the one standing at the edge, waiting for someone else to tell her what courage looked like. Now the roles had reversed, and it terrified her more than the bullets slicing through the rain. She whispered almost to herself, "Not today." Then she signaled forward. The squad broke cover, moving low, splashing through the muck. Every step seemed louder than thunder, every heartbeat a countdown. She caught sight of Alvarez, the quiet one who never complained, clutching his side where blood seeped through his shirt. He hadn't said a word about being hit. Pride mixed with fury in her, pride for his silence, fury that he thought his pain wasn't worth mentioning. She wanted to scream at him to stay back, but she knew he wouldn't. Soldiers carried more than wounds. They carried stubbornness like armor. Her boots sank into the mud as she crouched behind a broken tractor, pulling her rifle up. She spotted movement, two shadows shifting in the farmhouse window. She adjusted her scope, rain droplets streaking the lens, her finger finding the trigger's weight. But then something strange. One of the shadows hesitated, glancing over their shoulder. Fear, panic, not the confidence of an ambush. She hesitated too, the crosshairs holding steady. What was behind them? The answer came a second later. An explosion, distant but heavy enough to shake the air, lit the horizon. Not theirs, not local, something bigger, something planned. She lowered her rifle slowly, a chill crawling across her spine. Whoever they were fighting wasn't just holding this village. They were covering something, protecting something. But what? She clenched her jaw and turned to her squad. "We keep moving," she said. Her voice was calm even as her mind raced. The storm wasn't just weather, it was a warning. As they pressed forward, Alvarez stumbled, collapsing against her arm. She caught him, feeling the heat of his blood seeping through her sleeve. His lips trembled, not from weakness, but from stubborn refusal to admit he needed help. "I'm fine," he gasped. "You're not," she whispered, pulling him close. His eyes flickered with guilt, like he thought slowing them down was worse than dying. She saw herself in him years ago when she thought proving strength meant hiding pain. But now she knew better. "Courage," she muttered, almost choking on the word, "isn't pretending you don't bleed. It's walking anyway." The words weren't for him, they were for her. The farmhouse loomed closer, the rain pounding harder. Every instinct screamed this wasn't right. The windows glowed faintly, shadows shifting inside. She could almost feel the air vibrating, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. And then she remembered what the briefing officer had said, words no one had cared about at the time, something about missing intel, signals that didn't add up, silence where there should have been noise. They had ignored her back then, brushed her questions aside. She had swallowed her doubts. But now, here in the mud with her squad's lives in her hands, those ignored questions rose like ghosts she couldn't banish. She raised her fist, halting the team just short of the entrance. Silence fell, broken only by rain on metal. She scanned the building again. No movement now, no sound. Too quiet. Her breath caught, she motioned for cover. They crouched, waiting, confused, eyes flicking toward her. They trusted her, though she wasn't sure why. She had no certainty, no proof, only a knot of dread twisting in her chest. But maybe that was enough. Maybe instinct was all she had left. Then in the distance, another explosion thundered, closer this time. Dust shook loose from the farmhouse roof. And in that instant she knew. This wasn't about them. This wasn't even about this village. The real battle was somewhere else. Her squad didn't see it yet. They were still staring at her, waiting for the next order. She forced herself to meet their eyes, one by one. Wet, weary, desperate eyes that carried their own stories. A boy with a letter tucked in his vest. A man who traced a cross on his rifle before every move. Alvarez still trying to stand. Each of them carried pieces of lives waiting far away, lives that would be broken if she chose wrong now. Her throat tightened. She thought of her own past. The name etched into her dog tags, the memory of a promise she had made at a graveside. That was why she was here. That was why she couldn't afford to fail. She drew in a slow breath, the rain masking the tremor in her hands. "Listen," she said, voice low, cutting through the storm. "Something's not right, we don't go in blind." A beat of silence, then nods, no hesitation. They trusted her fear more than their own courage. Her chest ached with a mix of pride and terror. The farmhouse door creaked. Just a fraction, just enough for a sliver of blackness to show. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The world slowed to a breath. And then a voice from inside. Low, broken, not hostile. A whisper. Her stomach dropped. Not an enemy, not what they thought at all. But if not that, then who? Why did the whisper sound like a plea instead of a threat? For a second the rain itself seemed to pause, as if the world strained to hear. She motioned for silence, her fist raised, her breath locked in her throat. The squad froze, eyes darting to the door. The whisper came again, faint, shaky, and distinctly human. Not the harsh tone of orders, not the clipped language of the enemy. Her stomach twisted. How many times had she been told that hesitation could kill them all? Yet hesitation was all she felt now. She glanced at Alvarez, pale but stubborn, leaning against the wall with his rifle still in hand. He gave her the smallest nod, as if telling her to follow her gut. The farmhouse loomed ahead like a dark lung, inhaling fear, exhaling silence. She signaled two soldiers to cover her flanks, her own boots sinking deeper into the mud as she approached the door. Every creak of the hinges, every gust of wet wind, every drip from the eaves above sounded magnified, a distorted symphony of dread. The door shifted wider. Inside, shadows quivered in the dim light of a lantern, and then she saw them, three figures huddled together on the floor. Not soldiers, not armed. A woman clutching a child, an old man with trembling hands raised in surrender, their faces pale, hollow with hunger and fear. Civilians. Her heart dropped with the weight of it. All this fire, all this blood, all this chaos, and here they were, ordinary people caught in the jaws of it. She lowered her weapon slowly, her pulse hammering against her ribs. But something about them was wrong. Not their fear, not their desperation. It was the way the old man's eyes flicked, not at her but past her, toward a corner of the room. She shifted her rifle slightly, her finger brushing the trigger. There, half buried under a tarp, wires snaked across the floor. A device, crude but deadly. An improvised charge wired to detonate. Her breath hitched. They weren't hostages in the traditional sense. They were shields, unwilling, terrified shields forced into this trap. She motioned her team back, her eyes never leaving the family. The mother clutched her child tighter, whispering in a language the soldier didn't understand, but the fear in her voice was universal. The girl's small hand reached out as if asking for help or begging not to be left behind. And that was the moment. The impossible choice she'd always dreaded. Do they retreat and risk the mission, or do they stay and risk their lives for people who weren't even supposed to be here? Her chest constricted. She thought of her own mother, her brother, the family she had left behind with promises she barely believed when she made them. Promises that she would come back. Promises that she would make her service mean something. She stepped forward. Her squad shifted uneasily behind her, but no one spoke. They knew this wasn't about tactics anymore. This was about her, her courage, her judgment, her burden to carry. She knelt in the mud-soaked doorway, lowering her weapon. The child's eyes widened, reflecting the lantern light like fragile glass. She whispered, soft enough that only the family could hear, "You're safe. I'll get you out." But inside, her mind screamed at the wires. One wrong move, one mistake, one heartbeat too fast. She exhaled slowly, pressing her ear to her comms. "We've got civilians, and a device." Static hissed back at her. Then a voice, command, distant, detached. "Negative on extraction. Mission takes priority, proceed." Her vision blurred with rage. Mission takes priority. As if people were collateral, footnotes in reports. She clenched her jaw, tasting metal where she bit her lip. This was why she'd stopped trusting the voices in her earpiece long ago. They didn't see faces. They saw statistics. Her squad waited silent. Rain drummed the earth, thunder rolled in the distance. She rose, turning her back to the farmhouse, her gaze locking on each of her soldiers. They were exhausted, wounded, uncertain. But in their eyes was something she hadn't expected, trust. The kind of trust that didn't need orders to follow. They were waiting for her choice, not command. Her throat ached. Every path was dangerous, every step a gamble. But wasn't that what courage was? Not knowing the outcome, but walking anyway. She nodded once, decision made, we get them out. The words landed like a stone breaking the surface of water. Ripples of tension spread, then steadied into resolve. No one argued. No one hesitated. They simply adjusted their grips, their eyes sharpening. If she was going to carry this weight, they would carry it with her. She stepped inside, careful with each footfall, her breath shallow. The wires gleamed faintly in the lantern's glow. She knelt, examining the crude bomb. Simple but vicious. She had no training for dismantling it, at least, none beyond the basics every soldier memorized with dry palms and fast heartbeats in training. But training wasn't this. Training didn't have a crying child 2 feet away. Her fingers hovered over the wires, her gloves slick with rain and mud. She forced herself to stop, think, breathe. Her heartbeat slowed, each thud measured, each breath an anchor against the chaos. Behind her, Alvarez groaned, trying to sit straighter despite his wound. "Ma'am," his voice was weak yet steady. "We trust you, just do it." Her eyes burned. Trust was heavier than any weapon. She exhaled one last time, found the line that mattered and cut. Silence. No explosion, no fire, just silence thick and trembling. Then the old man collapsed to his knees, sobbing. The mother pulled her child close, whispering prayers. Relief surged through the squad, through her chest, through the farmhouse like a flood breaking a dam. She closed her eyes, letting the weight roll off her shoulders for a moment, just a moment, because she knew it wasn't over. This wasn't the end of the mission. This was only one step. But it was a step carved with pride. And for the first time that night, she believed, maybe the path she carved wasn't just for herself. Maybe it was for everyone who followed. The night did not quiet after the bomb was cut. It grew louder in a different way, not with explosions, but with the pounding of rain, the heaving of breaths, and the tremor of hearts still caught between fear and survival. She knelt on the farmhouse floor, her gloves damp with mud, the metallic scent of cut wire lingering in the air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The squad lingered in the doorway, rifles ready, but their eyes weren't on the shadows outside anymore. They were on her. Why did their gaze feel heavier than the mission itself? Why did their silence say more than command ever had? She rose slowly, her knees aching from the cold floor. The child clutched her mother tighter, eyes wide, as if the soldier was both savior and stranger. The old man whispered something, the cadence cracked but grateful, a prayer in a language she didn't know. She nodded once, a gesture small but heavy, before turning to her squad. "Move them out," she said quietly. Her voice barely carried above the rain, but it was enough. Two soldiers guided the civilians gently toward the back, away from the wires, away from the ghosts of what could have been. Alvarez struggled to stand, his shirt soaked crimson at the side, but when she stepped to help him, he brushed her off with a stubborn half-smile. "You've already carried enough," he muttered. The words cut deeper than any wound. Had she, or was she still just pretending? They regrouped outside, the storm sweeping over the open fields. Mud clung to boots, rain blurred vision, but their breaths came steadier now, steadier because of her decision. She felt it, even if she couldn't admit it aloud. They were no longer moving because command told them to. They were moving because she did. And yet beneath the fragile victory, unease coiled tighter. The explosions they had heard earlier, distant, deliberate, hadn't stopped. They were getting closer, rolling across the horizon like drums announcing something far worse. She knew the civilians weren't the reason this village was important. Something else lay ahead, and it wasn't waiting patiently. As they moved through the storm, she drifted back into memory, unbidden but sharp. She was 19 again, sitting in a crowded hall, the first time she'd raised her hand to serve. She remembered the stares, the smirks, the quiet doubts muttered just loud enough to sting. She won't last. Too soft. Doesn't have the spine for it. Every word had burrowed under her skin, burning in silence until she turned them into fuel. Now, years later, trudging through mud with lives in her hands, she wondered, had she proved them wrong? Or was she still fighting ghosts no one else could see? Her headset crackled again, the cold voice of command cutting through the storm. "Status update. Objective remains. No deviations authorized." She bit the inside of her cheek, holding back the sharp retort that rose in her throat. No deviations. As if they hadn't just walked through death to pull 3 innocents out of a trap. As if the blood seeping from Alvarez's side didn't matter. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she caught sight of Corporal Henson, young, too young, freckles barely visible under mud, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. He noticed her looking and tried to straighten, tried to appear braver than he felt. She recognized the act. She'd worn the same mask once, maybe still did. Finally, she pressed her comms. Moving forward, civilians secured. She left it at that, a lie of omission. Sometimes survival meant not giving command the whole truth. They reached the edge of the fields where broken walls and twisted beams marked the ruins of a factory. Lightning flashed, illuminating jagged metal like bones jutting out of the earth. The child whimpered, burying her face into her mother's shoulder. The soldier tightened her grip on her rifle. The factory, she remembered it now. Intelligence had called it abandoned. But why then were the enemy willing to guard it with bombs and blood? She signaled for a halt, crouching low as her eyes scanned the darkness. Her breath slowed, her ears straining past the storm. For a moment, nothing. Then a faint hum. Low, steady, mechanical, not the storm, not the earth, something alive beneath the ruin. Her pulse quickened. She turned to Alvarez, who leaned heavily on his rifle but kept his eyes sharp. "Hear that?" He nodded once. "Generators underground." She swallowed hard. Generators meant power. Power meant purpose. Whatever this place held, it wasn't just debris. Her squad shifted uneasily. The choice loomed again: press forward into the unknown, or wait, risk losing the thread of the mission. She could almost hear the voice of her instructors echoing in memory. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision you make when fear demands you turn away. She clenched her jaw. They had already come too far. With a silent gesture, she led them forward. The mud clung, the rain hammered, every step louder than it should have been. As they neared the shattered entrance of the factory, she glanced back at the civilians. The old man met her eyes, his gaze a mixture of gratitude and warning. Did he know what lay inside? Did he fear it as much as she did? Inside, the air grew heavier. Damp walls dripped. Rust groaned under the weight of years. And there, beneath the rubble, the hum grew stronger, vibrating through her boots, crawling up her bones. Then a sound broke the silence. Not the storm, not machinery. Voices. Low, sharp, the enemy. She froze, raising her hand for silence. Her squad crouched instantly, rifles ready, breaths held. The civilians shrank back into the shadows, the child clutching her mother's arm. The voices drew closer. She couldn't make out words, but the tone was clipped, hurried. They weren't patrolling, they were protecting something. Her heart thundered. What were they hiding? Her mind screamed for answers, but answers would come at a price. She steadied her rifle, her finger brushing the trigger. Her squad waited, trusting her to decide again. And in that pause, that thin line between action and silence, she realized something deeper. They weren't doubting her anymore. The only one who still did was herself. Her breath trembled, but her voice did not. "On me," she whispered. The storm outside raged on, but inside the factory, a different storm gathered, one made not of rain but of choices. And she knew the next step would carve more than a path. It would carve who she was meant to be. What if the voices in the dark weren't the real danger? That thought gripped her as she crouched inside the ruined factory, rain dripping through holes in the roof, pooling on the cracked floor. Her rifle was steady, but her breath was not. The hum of hidden machinery throbbed beneath everything, vibrating through her boots like a second heartbeat, one she didn't trust. Her squad waited in silence, every eye turned to her. Even Alvarez, pale and wavering, his hand pressed hard against his wound, never looked away. Their trust weighed more heavily than her rifle, heavier than her armor. Trust was something command couldn't order. It was earned moment by moment, choice by choice. And now their lives balanced on hers. The voices ahead grew sharper, closer. 2 men, maybe 3. Their language wasn't clear, but their tone was. They weren't relaxed. They were anxious, protecting something or stalling for time. She raised her fist, signaling the squad to hold. The civilians huddled behind broken beams, the child's quiet whimper muffled by her mother's hand. The soldier closed her eyes for half a second, just to breathe. Fear pressed hard against her chest, but she had learned long ago fear could sharpen you or it could break you. The choice was yours. When she opened her eyes, the world seemed clearer. Shadows became outlines. The hum beneath the floor sharpened in her ears, and there, tucked in the far wall, she saw it, a staircase, half hidden behind collapsed girders leading down. Her throat tightened, the source of the hum. She pressed her comms. Contact inside, possible underground. Command's voice snapped back, flat and cold. Priority is confirmation. Push through. Push through, as if it were simple, as if flesh and blood were expendable for the sake of information. She swallowed her bitterness, cutting the line before they could say more. Her mission wasn't for them anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. She gestured to two soldiers to flank, their boots splashing lightly in the pooled rainwater. The enemy voices drifted closer, their shadows stretching long against the lantern glow. She held her breath, raising her rifle. A creak too loud, one of her squad's boots against rusted metal. The voices cut off. Then sharp commands in the dark, movement. Her finger tightened, but before she could fire, the storm itself seemed to rush inside, a clash of sound, a rush of boots, the blur of figures breaking from cover. Shots cracked, deafening in the confined space. Sparks lit the rusted beams, bullets snapping off metal. Her squad returned fire, the echoes ringing through the ruin. She moved without thinking, every muscle trained for this dance of survival. One figure dropped, another fled into the shadows. The third, she saw him clearly, not running, not fighting, he sprinted for the staircase. Her stomach turned. He wasn't retreating, he was protecting something below. Downstairs, she shouted, her voice tearing raw through the chaos. Two soldiers covered her as she broke forward, boots hammering against slick concrete. The enemy soldier vanished down the steps. She followed, lungs burning, vision narrowing to a tunnel. The stairwell reeked of damp earth and oil. The hum grew louder, almost alive. Every step sank her deeper into something she wasn't ready for. At the bottom, light bled through a crack in a reinforced door. She pressed her back against the wall, heart pounding, sweat mixing with rain on her face. Her squad caught up, Alvarez stumbling but refusing to stop. For a moment's silence, only the hum, only her breath. What was behind that door? She thought of the civilians upstairs, their fragile eyes. She thought of her squad, bleeding, tired, but still following her into the dark. She thought of herself, years ago, when courage was something she doubted she could ever hold. And then she thought of the whispers, the ignored questions at the briefing table, the doubts no one wanted to face. Maybe this was why. She exhaled, stack up. Her squad moved into position. Her hands shook as she reached for the handle, but she didn't let them see. Fear was allowed. Breaking was. She pushed. The door groaned open. Light spilled out, cold, artificial, buzzing. The room stretched wide, carved into the earth, lined with machines that pulsed with power. And in the center, caged in steel, something that froze her breath. Not weapons, not munitions. Files, maps, hard drives, evidence of something sprawling planned, something that stretched far beyond this village. The enemy soldier stood there, his rifle aimed not at them but at the machines. Not defense, destruction. He was going to wipe it all. Her chest clenched. Information worth more than bullets. Proof of something her command didn't want to admit existed. She saw it in the way the enemy's finger twitched near the trigger, aimed at the console. Her voice cut sharp, "Don't." For a fraction of a second, his eyes met hers, and she saw it, not hatred but desperation, as if destroying this place wasn't victory but mercy. Why? The moment stretched. Her squad's rifles were raised. The soldier's finger hovered. The machines hummed louder, louder, until it felt like the earth itself was trembling. She realized then, this wasn't about courage in the way she'd always believed. It wasn't about being fearless or strong or unbreakable. It was about standing at the edge of choices no one should have to make, and making them anyway. Her voice cracked, but her aim did not. Step back. The enemy hesitated. Then the child's cry from upstairs cut through the silence. His eyes flicked, his grip loosened, and in that instant she moved. The world blurred, thunder roared, the machines buzzed. And the choice carved itself into her forever. The desert air was still, as if holding its breath. Smoke drifted in thin, fragile threads from the wreckage scattered across the valley. Silence was rare in war zones, an absence that spoke louder than explosions. To those who survived, it felt like a betrayal, a reminder of what had been lost to create such quiet. She stood alone at the edge of the canyon, her boots sinking into the ash-colored dust, her uniform marked by blood and soot that wasn't all her own. Her rifle hung across her chest, but she wasn't holding it anymore. Her hands trembled, not from fear, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of everything she had carried for far too long. The mission had been brutal. Too many didn't make it back. Too many names would never be spoken again in laughter, never rise again in songs around campfires. She had survived, but survival, she realized, didn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it felt like punishment. And yet in that silence, beneath the weight of grief, she felt something stir inside her chest. A flicker, a spark. It wasn't glory, it wasn't vengeance. It was something simpler, something truer, an ember of purpose, of resilience, of defiance. The world had expected her to fall, to break, to fade into ashes like so many others, but she hadn't. She couldn't. Because the world still needed that spark. The evacuation zone was miles away, but every step toward it felt heavier than the last. Each ruined structure she passed whispered memories, shouts of comrades, the crack of gunfire, the pounding of artillery. She paused once, kneeling beside the shattered remains of a comms tower. Half buried in rubble, a soldier's helmet stared up at the sky, its visor cracked. She picked it up, brushing off the dust, and placed it gently atop a stone. No words, just a gesture, a promise that the fallen would not be forgotten. Her throat tightened as she walked on, the canyon walls narrowing around her. She thought of the people back home, the families waiting for letters that would never come, the children who would never understand why their parents didn't return, the elders who would sit by empty chairs at dinner tables. But she also thought of something else, of the young recruit who once told her, trembling, that they only had the courage to step onto the battlefield because she was there, of the mechanic who said she gave him hope when engines failed, of the villagers who whispered her name like it was a shield, a blessing. They had all seen her spark. They had all carried a piece of it with them. By the time she reached the outpost where survivors had gathered, night was falling. Fires burned low in makeshift pits, soldiers sat with hollow eyes, and medics moved quietly among them, their hands steady even though their hearts were breaking. When she entered, heads turned. For a moment the silence stretched, then one soldier stood, saluting her with trembling fingers. Another followed, then another. Soon the whole camp was standing, battered but unbroken, saluting the woman who had carried them when they thought they could no longer stand. She wanted to protest, to tell them she was no hero, just another soldier doing what she had to, but she saw the truth in their eyes. To them she was more than flesh and bone, more than scars and fatigue. She was proof that survival was possible, that hope was not yet dead. She nodded once silently, her throat too tight for words. Later, when the fires burned lower and the camp grew quieter, she sat alone, cleaning her weapon with steady hands. Across from her, a young soldier barely old enough to shave sat watching her. "You don't look afraid," he said finally. His voice was raw, still carrying the tremors of battle. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but clear. "Fear doesn't go away," she said softly. "You just learn to walk with it." The boy swallowed, nodding. He seemed to take the words into himself, like a stone pressed into his palm, something he could carry when the nights grew too long. She realized then that her spark wasn't just her own. It belonged to everyone who saw it, everyone who needed it to light their own way. Dawn came pale and cold, painting the sky in shades of gray. Orders came down. The survivors were to be evacuated to a safer zone. But before they left, she stood at the center of camp, looking out at the soldiers, the medics, the engineers who had somehow endured. Her voice carried, steady and low, yet strong enough that everyone heard. We are more than what we've lost. We are what we carry forward. Every step we take, every breath we draw, it honors the ones who can't be here anymore. That spark inside you, it's not small. It's the reason we're still standing. Don't let the world take it from you. For a moment, silence held again. Then a murmur rose among the soldiers, not of despair this time, but of something steadier, harder to break: resilience. The transport arrived hours later, a battered aircraft with scorch marks along its wings. As they prepared to leave, she lingered at the edge of the ramp, looking back at the valley. Smoke still curled upward, carrying with it the remnants of a battle that had cost too much. Her heart ached, but she knew this wasn't the end. Because sparks spread, they catch, they ignite. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the world was waiting for a flame. Years later, stories would be told of that mission, of the battle that seemed unwinnable, of the soldiers who nearly broke but didn't, and always, always, of the woman who walked out of the ashes carrying something no fire could destroy. Some would call her a soldier, some a savior, some a ghost who burned brighter than the sun. But those who had truly seen her, those who had stood beside her in the smoke and blood, would know the truth. She was a spark, and beneath the ashes of loss, she gave the world something it had never dared to witness before: the courage to rise again.